Homelessness is expensive. It's something we hear from those who live on the street, speaking about the lives lost and the impossible cycle that's really hard to break. And we also hear that phrase from your elected leaders who are tasked with finding a fix. Ultimately, you, the taxpayer, pay for homelessness. Tonight, The Homeless Project takes a deep dive into some of those costs and how dangerous buildings only multiply the problem for everybody. Do you mind if I come in and show my viewers? The Homeless Project took us to downtown Las Vegas, invited into the sidewalk home of a U.S. veteran. Jim lives under a framework of blankets with his cat and his Corey. She's homeless too. What's your address?
Corner of
6th and Bridger.
For now.
Jim and Corey camp near where the old El Cid and Annex buildings once stood, haven for hundreds of homeless people illegally squatting in abandoned buildings. They say they've seen it all.
People were going in and out of El Cid when it was still up. And the police were over there. They empty it out every few days. So you got rats in there the size of my cat.
I feel safer out here on the streets than I would in an abandoned building. Because in an abandoned building, if I'm there by myself, you have rapists.
Las Vegas's battle against homelessness has gone hand in hand with doing battle with dangerous buildings and property owners who cannot keep up with the homeless who break in and in many cases burn up the buildings. The El Cid Jim spoke of was a mess for years, on fire multiple times, requiring police and firefighters to risk their own lives going in. This is video from a 2019 city council meeting after city leaders, metro and fire officials said they had had enough.
There were people in my presence that were jumping out of windows. There were upwards of 50 homeless people living in this building. This is unacceptable. We cannot allow this to go on. We are going to lose people's lives.
Code enforcement Vicky Ozuna joined the chorus, lamenting the hundreds of calls for police and fire response and the cost to taxpayers. Mayor Goodman shaking her head at the staggering cost.
Excuse me, say that again, please.
It's not just at the old El Cid, which, by the way, was torn down at the expense of the owner. It was also over at the old Moulin Rouge, where 300 homeless lived inside abandoned condos and other encampment sites, says the city.
So we have over 100 call-outs for encampment-related fires on an annual basis.
Flood channels filled with refuse set on fire, wetlands torched, and homes in neighborhoods too. What's the cost? The city says every year $2.7 million are spent in abatement. Millions more in recent years from fire and police calls. You, the taxpayers, write the checks. Checks people who own old, dangerous buildings are often reluctant to write themselves to either bring their buildings up to code or secure or tear them down. For years, such was the case with the old El Cid. In early 2019, police characterized repeated conversations with that building's owner.
Mrs. Lau blames the city of Las Vegas for what is happening at the El Cid buildings. She blames all of you.
Are these property owners just bad neighbors?
People who live out of state, if they don't see it and they're not here to look at their property, they just forget about that it's actually even here and what kind of issues it could be contributing to the neighborhood.
And when city officials have to spend time and money on dangerous buildings, that time, that money, they say, gets diverted from other projects the city says could actually help the homeless.
We do care about the people who are staying in these properties. In fact, when my officers go out, they'll contact the MORE team and they'll have them come out and offer services and try to get them into some sort of shelter so that they have a place to go.
A place to go. The million-dollar question. An expensive question for city leaders and an expensive question for people like Corey and Jim who know, as of February 2nd, camping here is a crime. All right, so a lot of you ask me when I'm out there on this story, why doesn't the city use these old buildings to just house people instead of tearing them down? Well, here's their answer. They tell me they don't own the buildings. The property owners do. And most don't want to spend the money to bring them up to safety code. And if they do, are homeless, don't really have the money to live in them once they're fixed up. So we want you to keep your phone calls and the emails coming. The Homeless Project has a lot of ground to cover in the next year, holding leaders accountable, following the money in 2020, and we need your feedback and ideas. We listen to every voicemail, we read every email.